sutural formation. Biotype is different. So it is much more complex to find the center of resistance skeletally than pentagonal one. So after many, many cases, we discovered if I can apply expansion force in between the zygoma or further back, I get relatively parallel expansion, lateral expansion. If I place MSC more anteriorly, then I get predominantly anterior expansion. So we kind of discovered we have to be in between zygoma or more posterior, not anterior. The other system is what I call bone-driven system. So what is a bone-driven system? It's a different concept. They don't really care about the force factor. They're looking for the best bone, right? So where would be the best bone in the palate? Usually anterior palate, right? Or the lateral walls of the palate. So if you look at the position of the anchor, it's relatively anterior. So bone-driven system creates force factor that's further away from the resisting structures. So net result can be quite different. This one promotes partial expansion. This one promotes more tipping like expansion. So result is like this. With MSC or any resistance-driven system will give you relatively parallel expansion. Bone-driven system which is very similar to SARP or Hyrax. We get predominantly anterior expansion, very little, much less posterior expansion. So at the beginning, we weren't so sure whether we were getting this consistently. So we took a lot of records. We measured the angle between these two blue lines to see whether we are truly getting parallel expansion. So Dr. Lim was one of my first students from Taiwan. She did this investigation. So she looked at MSC patients we had and Hyrax patients we had. She measured the angle between these two blue lines you saw. And result was quite striking. Hyrax, we saw some divergence, which we expected, right? But it was only 7.5 degrees, not so large. But when you're looking at data like this, you have to look at the range. Look at the Hyrax, all over the map here, right? What does this mean? You don't know what you're gonna get with each and every patient. Some patient, it could be relatively parallel. Another patient can be 15-degree divergence. So when you have wide distribution like this, the average number is completely meaningless. So Hyrax, we don't know what kind of pattern we're gonna get with my particular patient. So kind of useless data. But with MSC, very consistent, very tight range, all within 2 degrees. Average was about half degree. So that is a good number, right? Almost always, we're getting almost parallel expansion. That data is telling us something meaningful. So we're very happy at the time. So my student eventually graduated. She moved back to Taiwan. So one of the things that I love to do is visit my students all over the world, since I'm traveling anyways. So actually she's in Tainan, which is the 3rd largest city in Taiwan. And she opened up her clinic. So I told her I'm coming. She came to the train station with a banner. When I visited the office, she had my face on the cup. So very nice. And this is our tradition. Whoever worked with me in Moon Lab, I do moon blessing. You know what moon blessing is? I go to my student's clinic, I pretend like I'm their patient. So there's a meaning behind this. The meaning behind this is that I trust my patients so much that I will be their patient. So it's sort of my way of saying that she's really good orthodontist. Right? So whenever we do this, their practice really do well. So this building right here is a 3-story building. She ended up buying the whole building. So moon blessing works. So I love to visit my students and I give my blessing. So her study was followed through with another student of mine. She's from Turkey, and much bigger sample here. Okay. First one was a preliminary study, this is a real study. And you can see the angle between these two green lines was about half degrees. Range, very, very tight. So this means, again, almost always, we get almost parallel expansion when you use MSC correctly. Okay? So this one we actually got to publish. So Dr. Kola is an interesting lady. She came from Turkey, started working in my lab. And then she met her husband. Okay? He's from Peru. So can you imagine the difficulty in their relationship? She's a Muslim. Peruvian is Catholic. So could Muslim marry a Catholic? Impossible. And so it was a very, very bad struggle. But eventually, love won. So in Moon Lab, we call my lab United Nations. Love wins. So we went to their wedding. This is all Moonlight people, almost like a reunion. So I love going to my students' weddings, especially one like this one. So since they cannot live in Peru, they cannot live in Turkey because of religious differences, they decided to live in America, Houston. So they just opened up a practice this year. So I visited them. So I'm giving my moon blessing and another reunion with a beautiful Peruvian food. So it was very interesting. So anyways, if you're getting this parallel expansion, does that mean we're disarticulating Pterygopalatine suture? We must be, right? How can you get posterior expansion without disarticulating the Pterygopalatine suture? So this is the Pterygopalatine suture. If you cut across, suture looks like this. So it's used. So we did same cut before expansion, after expansion. And you can see almost complete destruction of the Pterygopalatine suture. So it is possible to disarticulate Pterygopalatine suture without the surgery. That's actually proving that Pterygopalatine suture did not fuse. It just interlocks. When we looked at the hyrax, Pterygopalatine suture was very well intact after the expansion, not like MSC. So Dr. Nelson was not wrong. She was right. If you use hyrax, strength of the hyrax cannot be overcome. Why? Too strong. Hyrax cannot deliver this kind of force. However, with the resistant movement system, with MSC, and we're promoting posterior force vector, we're able to disarticulate heavily interlocked Pterygopalatine suture. So this is the first time we actually illustrated Pterygopalatine suture is not fused in mature patients. And you could split non-surgically. So this paper was sort of one of the landmark paper we have. So we get a lot of citations on this one. And then we got curious after seeing this result. How often do we see this radiographically visible disarticulation? I mean, I can show you only good cases all day long. But what about bad ones? How often do we see this? So Dr. Pollock looked into it. 84% of the MSC patients, we can actually visualize Pterygopalatine suture disarticulation. So 84, all the people in my lab very happy. But I was curious, how come it's only 84? Because the other study showed that almost always we get parallel expansion. Okay? That means almost always Pterygopalatine suture should disarticulate. So it should not be 84, it should be closer to 100. Right? So what happened to that 16%? That was interesting. Further investigation, we found out that those 16% that you cannot see the gap is because the sutural orientation. suture orientation was like this, parallel to the maxillary movement. So when anterior bone moves like this, it slides on the surface of the posterior bone, so you don't see the gap. 84% had this kind of configuration. So when the hemimaxilla moves laterally, gap appears immediately. So that was interesting. So we decided to take some landmark and look at the relationship changes from the before to after expansion. And we found out 100% of the successful MSC cases, pterygopolyton suture is disarticulated. Sometimes you don't see the gap because sutures like this are like this. So that makes more sense. So now, back to resistant-driven system versus bone-driven system. Resistant-driven system has to have a force vector closer to up here, right? So all the way up from the palatal bone in order to promote superior expansion. Bone-driven system, the force factor will be a little bit lower. So naturally, you can predict the resistant-driven system will give you more superior expansion than the bone-driven system. Okay? Very important distinction. And another very important aspect of MSC is the bicortical engagement. Why? Well, primary concern with the resistant-driven system is the position of the force vector, which means you have to place anchor posteriorly. But if you go toward the posterior part of the maxilla, what happens to the bone thickness? Gets thinner and thinner. Okay. So secondary concern is the bone quality. Okay. Bone-driven system, the other way around. They don't care about the force vector. They just want to find the good bone. Right? Resistant-driven system is the other way. Force vector most important. But to find it after finding the position, bone may not be so good. So bicortical engagement was necessary for us to have an adequate bone anchor. So when we have a bicortical engagement, this force vector will transmit superiorly. When we have a monocortical engagement, cancellous bone, it doesn't have much support. So screw will tip, and much less superior expansion. And more importantly, tremendous strain gets felt by the implant because of tipping. Okay? So lots of failures. So I basically wanted this. Heavy force here, force transmits up here, get superior expansion like this. Relatively parallel expansion. Not just from the occlusal view, but also from the frontal view. Bodily expansion. I don't have time to discuss this paper, but if you're interested, this paper is a very good one, illustrating the difference between monocortical versus bicortical engagement. And we actually made the cover of AJODL. So, nice study. So let's look at some of the failed cases. Look at this one, sticking out, right? Not all the way up. Monocortical engagement. Look at this, screw tipping. Right? And we couldn't split the suture. So, failure. Another one, this one. You can see monocortical engagement, screws very long, sticking out, right? Couldn't get it up, get them up all the way. So, again, we couldn't split the suture. Another one. None of the 4 screws are bicortical engaged. See the severe tipping? Okay. Now look at this. Terrible. So, number one reason for failure with MSC, monocortical engagement. So, we must have bicortical engagement. Another case here. Only 17. But this case, if you compare this one and this one, well past one. Okay, here, they're split. Almost made it, right? Almost made it. But because many of these screws were monocortically engaged, you couldn't quite make it. So with the further expansion, okay, no success. When we finally remove the appliance, look at the screws here, badly bent. Why? Because of all the strain. These are titanium screws. You know how much force it requires to bend the titanium? That much strain go to these screws. And I'm very lucky because this one didn't break. What if it broke? How are you going to retrieve this? This is very close to the nasal cavity, right? Not a good situation. So make sure you have bicortical engagement. You have to have screws like this. Otherwise it won't work. So many people purchase MSC and they realize, okay, bone to thin. I'm going to go forward like this. This is the problem. Why? You have a monocortical engagement anteriorly, because when you go forward, the path of insertion changes. You have a bicortical, monocortical. So posterior screws will split like this. Anterior screw will do this. Tremendous strain goes onto the appliance itself. So not only you have a less success, less chance of success, but also you may break the appliance. So this is no, not to do. So how do we deal with the thin bone then? Well, we're going to talk about that later in troubleshooting. But going anteriorly is the worst thing you can do when you have a patient with a very thin bone. So here's another example. Look at this anterior position. Okay. Monocortical, bicortical. Tremendous strain goes onto the appliance. See how appliance is not breaking? What if, will we have a success at all if we place the MSC anterior? Well, orthodontics, we get lucky a lot. So sometimes you'll split even with a bad position. Right? However, even if you get lucky, it's going to be predominantly anterior expansion. Don't expect this parallel expansion that I'm showing you today, because there's some misusage of MSC. You're going to get V-shaped expansion, just like all the other bone removal might be. So I say this is really bad. Don't ever do that. You have to place it posteriorly. So I'll give you a good example. This study came out not too long ago, showing all the potential complications with MSC. Of course, any appliance, there are complications. But this was an overwhelming number of complications. And some complications are very strange, like hearing loss and things like that, which I never experienced in my team, with my team. So I looked at their figures, and it was very clear why they have this kind of results. Okay. You see the problem. Should be pretty obvious to you. All these were misusage of MSC. None of these would have a bicortical engagement, right? So is this really MSC study? For me, that's not an MSC study. This study is showing you what could happen if you misuse MSC. And I always give this analogy. You buy a chainsaw, you don't read the instruction, and you end up cutting up your arms. Is this the fault of the chainsaw or fault of the operator? You have to think about this. It's just a tool. You have to learn how to use it correctly. And don't blame the appliance after misusing it like this, right? Very, very bad. So if you misuse MSC, you get a result like this. V-shaped expansion, right? If you use it properly, you should get a result like this. Yeah, so even with MSC, you can have bone-driven system. But if you want to use MSC anteriorly, do not buy MSC. MSC is not made for that. There are many, many bone-driven systems. There are more bone-driven systems than resistance-driven systems in this world. Why not just buy bone-driven system? It's designed for that. MSC appliance is not designed for misusage. So again, I'm not here to sell the appliance. If you want to place MARPI, place the palate with good bone, do not use MSC. MSC is not the appliance for you. Okay? So again, when you read articles, you have to be very careful what you read. I say this because I publish a lot of papers. Do you think it's difficult to publish a paper? Those of you who haven't published paper may think, yeah, it's maybe difficult. It's not, it's very, very easy. All you have to do is pass 3 reviewers. If your 3 reviewers agree, then you get to publish paper. It's a very, very low bar. So when you read the paper, really be skeptical. Don't just read the conclusion. Study the entire article. See how a study will be conducted. If one market study says one thing, another market study says opposite thing, they're not lying. There's some design of the study. They may be different. Maybe one market study used a certain system that is very different than the other one, right? So you have to digest. Really investigate what you're reading. Because not every publication is useful. So if you use MSc properly, this is what you should get. You should get superior expansion. And you should also get posterior expansion. Yeah, superior and posterior expansion. So here's another paper. And this is a paper we published a long time ago, comparing MSc with HYREX. HYREX, you see lots of bone strain. That's what's causing the bone bending. MSc forces within the suture or internal structure of the skeleton. So in a nutshell, this is what you can expect. High angle case, if you use HYREX versus MSc, the changes are quite different. With the HYREX, often you can open up the bite. With MSc, you can control the vertical dimension better because it's relatively parallel expansion. So let me give you one clinical case. There's a young patient with a relatively high angle. He's actually high angle class 3. So you can see edge to edge, anterior cross bite.